Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our third week back in school. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Today, I just wanted to review a couple things from last week just to make sure that you guys are completely understanding everything we went over. So, one of the little things that I wanted to go over is what we call Russia or the Soviet Union or the USSR. So, all three of those are basically the same country, nickname, whatever you want to call it. So anytime that you guys are seeing those terms, just know that that is Russia. So again, the USSR, Russia, or the Soviet Union are all the same country. Um, the other thing I wanted to touch on is what was going on in Germany right after the war. So the war ended, the Second World War ended in 1945, basically directly after Germany is divided in two, with the western half going to Great Britain, United States, and France, and the eastern half going to the Soviet Union. The western half was basically turned into a democratic capitalist society, while the east was under the dictatorship and communism of Stalin. So what ends up happening is you have two different areas that are completely contrasted to each other. So that makes it very interesting to see the development of those two halves after the war. The reason why it was divided up is because of the United States and Soviet Union's issues with each other at the end of the war. It basically stands for, or it basically shows how the Cold War is beginning. Remember that the Cold War lasts from 1947 to 1991. So it's about 44 years of conflict. The next thing that I wanted to go over is why we call it a Cold War. The reason we call it a Cold War is because that there was no actual fighting between the USSR and Russia. They never actually went against each other in the open field of combat. Basically, it stayed below a hot conflict. So that's why we call it a Cold War. So they used a lot of propaganda, they used a lot of threats, and they used a lot of proxy conflicts in order to avoid directly fighting each other. Some of those proxy wars include the Yom Kippur War, Vietnam War, Korean War, and Soviet Afghan War as well. Proxy conflicts is another definition to remember. Proxy conflicts are whenever two large powerhouses, for example, Russia and the United States, fight against each other by basically influencing smaller countries that have conflicts and backing one side or the other. So remember my analogy, you can think of it as a puppet show. You've got strings being pulled behind the scene, you've got people being used as puppets to fight these conflicts. And how they use proxy wars is if they didn't want to get directly involved, they would either send military supplies, they would send in military trainers, but not necessarily their own forces, or they would just give them propaganda against the opposite side to make the opposite side look bad. One last thing that I wanted to go over was spying and sabotage. So, spying and sabotage is going on quite a bit during this time period. What we see going on is both countries are sending spies into either areas of conflict or into each other's governments. The entire purpose of that is to gain information and find any advantage that either one of them could have between the powerhouses. If you were caught being a spy, you were then turned into a double agent or arrested, or if you were in the Soviet Union, probably executed. So it was a dangerous game to be in. Starting with this video, all Edpuzzles will start to be worth double the points. This is to kind of help those of you guys that are still virtual and might need a little grade boost. It's also a boost to basically everybody because if you follow along and you get most of the questions right, then you're gaining an upper hand and gaining a little bit more back towards your grade with each Edpuzzle. So that's all I have for today. Have a great week, and we will continue with our Cold War lesson this week.